Pepco Studios in Oklahoma City. You're watching the Press Row. I'm Jenni Carlson here with Barry Tramel, and we're brought to you by Papa John's Pizza. Go online to papajohns.com and check out all their pizza deals, great for football or baseball nights this fall. Hey, let's get to our inbox email questions from our readers answered here on video. Let's start with one from Carol. She says, someone needs to ask Reggie Jackson if he'd rather be Tony Roten or Manu Ginobili. Obviously the question of starting, not starting. Reggie again saying, I want to be a starter. All the greats have started.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's an interesting question. It's a little bit misguided. Tony Roten, sort of a journeyman, been a backup, probably going to start this year with in the NBA. But I don't think that's what the question is. I think it's ask Reggie Jackson if he'd rather be Manu Ginobili or Kyle Lowry, somebody like that. Kyle Lowry, very good player, a budding star basically in Toronto and on a team that's up and coming. Would you rather be Kyle Lowry or Manu Ginobili? Manu Ginobili is a superstar because of his team's success. And as a sixth man, Reggie wants to start. You can understand that, but he's certainly in a good position as the Thunder's sixth man. That's the question. How much does he want to be a star, and how much is he willing to sacrifice team success to be a star?
Yeah, and I think Carol brings up a good point because while the comparison may be slightly off, I still think it's worth throwing out there for the standpoint of if Reggie Jackson really is insistent on being a starter and he goes out and tests the free agent waters and goes with another team, I mean, there's a chance he lands on a team that is nowhere close to contending for a title, and he just becomes a guy who starts for another NBA team. And here in Oklahoma City, he's a guy who is near to a championship. He can be on a championship team for basically as long as Kevin Durant or Russell Westbrook or Serge Ibaka or any combination thereof are around. So I think the point of, if you test those waters, you don't always end up in something better. I think that is a valid point, and one that Reggie Jackson's going to have to think about, because it looks like this thing is going to go into free agency, so he's going to have a chance to look around. What does he value most? All right, we go back to the inbox from Brandon. He says, Kansas Athletic Director Shenan Zinger needs to get a tough guy that will get high school kids to the University of Kansas for their football team, get them to do work. Mark Mangino called it sawing wood. Bill Snyder calls it life. That's how you win at a place like Kansas.
Well, I actually think the Kansas job is a little underrated in that everybody is considering it a dead-end place. And I think there are several ways to win at Kansas. Mangino won at Kansas. Glenn Mason won big at Kansas in the 90s, had 2 excellent years. So, going back, Bud Moore had some good teams in the 70s. Pepper Rogers went to the Orange Bowl in the 60s. Kansas is not a dead-end job, but you definitely need you need a coach who has energy. You need a coach who can recruit, who can, as you said earlier, can beat the bushes and find hidden gems, and coach them up when they get there. You can't get in there with, I think that Charlie Weiss brought a little bit of too much egotism, too much resting on his laurels. Tom Brady wasn't quarterback in the Jayhawks. They needed a quarterback, and I think Kansas can do it a lot of different ways. I think they can go a lot of different directions, but the main thing is find a coach who is energetic and is committed and knows it's not going to be easy. Mark Mangino didn't go to the Orange Bowl in his second year, in his third year. He went in year number 6. So it takes time.
Yeah, it definitely does. But I think you can win at Kansas, maybe not to the level of some of the other powerhouses in the Big 12, but we've seen that teams ebb and flow in the Big 12. I mean, look where Texas is right now. If you're in a good spot at Kansas right now, you could beat Texas. I mean, they only lost by 3 touchdowns, and they didn't play great at all last weekend, the game that ultimately cost Charlie Weiss his job. So I think there's a chance to still win ball games in the Big 12 if you're at Kansas. You can't beat yourself. That's one other thing that I really remember about the Mark Mangino teams as he got more and more of his guys in there and his philosophy instilled. They didn't commit a lot of penalties. They didn't turn the ball over a bunch. They didn't make mistakes. Yes, he went out and got players that they then developed into some pretty good talent. I mean, look at a guy like Chris Harris out of here in Oklahoma, out of Bixby, now with the Broncos. He was a guy that went to Kansas, largely unrecruited around here. He goes to Kansas, becomes an NFL guy, was fantastic for them. There are a bunch of other examples of that too. They didn't beat themselves. You got to instill that. You've got to preach that. You've got to demand that. And frankly, I think what you say about the energy, that's part of that too. You've got to make those demands and ask your guys. You cannot go out and beat us on the field. All right, back to the inbox. This one from Gabriel. He says, Michigan fans and alums want Brady Hoke fired because our football team is uncompetitive, ill-prepared, and not making much improvement, especially on offense. We would love one of the Harbaughs. I think Kevin Sumlin would be great, but those are long shots. So, do you think Josh Heupel is ready to be a head coach at a school like Michigan? The coaching carousel is turning, huh, Barry?
Well, it's an interesting question. Josh Heupel at a school like Michigan, and the natural assumption is no, he's not, because for a job like Michigan, you think you need a bigger name. Josh Heupel's been mentioned for SMU and maybe Kansas. I don't know. I hadn't heard Kansas, but probably. So it's a big jump from SMU and Kansas to Michigan. Except when you look at it, Josh Heupel's not too far from where Bob Stoops was as a coordinator. Josh is now what? Is he 90? Josh is probably. He's
at least 35, 36.
He's shooting into the mid-30s, late 30s, and Bob was, I think, 38 when he was hired at Oklahoma. So he's in the neighborhood there. Got a long pedigree and an established power as a coordinator. Now, he didn't win the national title like Bob Stoops did with Florida, and he didn't work for multiple big-time coaches like Steve Spurrier, Bill Snyder, the way Stoops did. However, you never know. I think it's possible that Michigan does go for an assistant coach because they've tried the head coach thing now here twice in a row. Brady Hoke from San Diego State, Rich Rodriguez from West Virginia, didn't work either time. Often a school will look elsewhere. I know Michigan likes the Michigan State defensive coordinator, whose name escapes me right now, but I think it's possible that Michigan would look at a coordinator.
Yeah, I think it is possible too. I think if Michigan does punt Brady Hoke, which is looking more and more likely because one of the things that actually wasn't mentioned in the litany of things wrong at Michigan is that they played a quarterback who was concussed. It sure appeared, and I think there's some evidence out there now that he was. That sort of thing is not going to go over well in today's football era. So there's a lot of problems at Michigan right now. You know what? I think if they run him out, I think they at least got to call Les Miles. I think that has to be their first call. But bringing up a guy like Josh Heupel, here's a guy who's been loyal, who's been competitive over a lot of different years. They've had, different quarterbacks. They've changed systems into a more of a zone read, running quarterback system. They've had injuries. He's managed through that. So, I think that there's probably something to be said for Josh Heupel at least being a name worth considering. And he knows that part of the country. He's from up in the Dakotas, so he knows Big Ten football. It could be an interesting mix. I think, a guy that they would definitely take a look at. All right, back to the inbox one more time from Ted. He says, can you compare Cliff Kingsbury and Mike Gundy's records in their first 17 games? I like both coaches, but I think you'll find that Gundy did not have a winning record until his fourth season in conference. First 17 games, Gundy was 8-9, Kingsbury 10-7. Very similar opponents. What about that, Barry?
Well, it's an interesting point, and it goes to my and other people's criticism of Kingsbury in recent days. But my issue with Kingsbury is not really how the team has performed so much in the last year and a half that he's been the head coach. There's been some issues at Tech, but they've won some games, but it's just the lack of experience. I don't know that they can trust what they were getting when they had Kingsbury, and now I still don't know that they know if they have an accomplished head coach. Cliff Kingsbury had been a football coach of any kind for only 5 years when he was hired by Tech to be the head coach. Mike Gundy had been a football coach for 15 years when he was hired as a head coach by Oklahoma State in 2005. So I think the difference in the experience, the difference in the resumes, the difference in just their career path, I think Texas Tech took a flyer on Cliff Kingsbury. Maybe it will work out, but if it doesn't, Texas Tech has only itself to blame.
Well, and if it doesn't, they've got a big payday that is going to come due because they gave Kingsbury that huge contract before this season started. He's under contract until 2020. So not only did they hire him without much experience, they extended him for years and years with still very little evidence of where he was taking the program. I think it's headed in a good direction. They won more last year. It looks like they're continuing to get better. But you look at things like Look at all the junior college players that they've got on defense. They've obviously decided they have to go that route to get better on defense, and that's a slippery slope. That shows that you're not developing long term. You're sort of in, crisis mode almost. So to me, there's some things to be worried about even in the short term, and then giving him that extension, just baffling. Not sure what Tech decided to do that for. Hey, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoma.